In the heart of medieval France, when kings ruled by divine right and knights rode beneath banners of gold and crimson, there lived a man whose name would echo through centuries: Gilles de Rais. He was born into privilege, wealth, and power, but his destiny would twist into something far darker than glory. To some, he was a hero, a marshal of France, a companion of Joan of Arc. To others, he became a monster. This is the story of a man who rose to the highest honors of his nation and fell into the deepest shadows of his own soul. Gilles de Rais was born around 1405 in a world scarred by war. France and England were locked in the brutal Hundred Years' War, a struggle that had turned villages into ashes and hope into dust. His family was among the oldest and richest in Brittany. Castles, farmlands, and gold surrounded him from birth. But luxury came with loneliness. His mother died when he was still young. Soon after, his father too, leaving the boy in the care of his grandfather, Jean de Craon, a man cold and cunning who valued wealth above compassion. From that day on, Gilles learned that power was everything, and that weakness was a sin. He studied Latin, swordsmanship, and the arts of war. By his teenage years, he could ride a horse better than most knights twice his age. But beneath the armor of discipline, a hunger was growing, not just for victory, but for greatness, fame, and immortality. When Gilles came of age, France was drowning. The English army occupied vast lands, and the French crown was losing hope. And then, from the small village of Domremy, came a peasant girl who claimed she was sent by God. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc, or as we know her, Joan of Arc. Her voice stirred the hearts of men, and her courage awakened a sleeping nation. Gilles de Rais was among the first nobles to believe in her divine mission. He became one of her closest companions, fighting at her side in the battle to free Orléans. Under a rain of arrows and fire, he charged beside her, a blue banner waving, the sound of steel echoing through the city streets. When the smoke cleared, the impossible had happened. The French had won. For his bravery, Gilles was rewarded by King Charles VII himself. He was made Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors in the kingdom. For a moment, his name shone like the sun. He was a hero, a defender of France, a symbol of chivalry. But behind that shining armor, something had begun to change. In 1431, Joan of Arc was captured by the English and burned at the stake as a heretic. Gilles watched the smoke rise over Rouen, and with it, the last of his faith. He withdrew from the battlefield. He returned to his estates, wealthy beyond imagination, but empty of purpose. In his castles, Tiffauges, Machecoul, Champtocé, he surrounded himself with luxury: gold cups, velvet robes, feasts, music, and plays. He even built a private chapel and filled it with choirs of boys singing heavenly hymns, perhaps to remind him of a purity he had lost. But slowly, his life began to decay. He spent without limit. Gold flowed like water. Soon, debts surrounded him. His once proud name was whispered now with mockery. The marshal has lost his reason. And in that ruin, Gilles sought a new path, a forbidden one. He turned to alchemy and sorcery, desperate to regain his fortune. He summoned strange men, magicians, astrologers, who promised to call upon demons to bring him riches from the dark. One of them, a mysterious figure named Prelati, convinced him that sacrifice could open the gates to infernal power. And thus began the descent. No one knew exactly when it started. Servants whispered of cries in the night. Villagers spoke of children who went missing near the marshal's lands, never to return. At first, no one dared to accuse a man of his rank. But as the months passed, the rumors grew louder. The laughter from his castle halls had changed, no longer joyous, but hollow, haunted. When investigators finally entered his castle years later, what they found turned courage into terror. Clothing of missing children, instruments of cruelty, and stories told by his own servants, too horrifying to believe. They said that Gilles, once the savior of France, had become a hunter of innocence. They said his search for power had led him to offer human sacrifices to the demons he believed could make him rich again. How much of it was truth, and how much was fear, no one can say. But in 1440, the church and the crown had heard enough. In the city of Nantes, the trial of Marshal Gilles de Rais began. Nobles, priests, and commoners gathered to witness it. The charges were heavy: heresy, witchcraft, sodomy, and the murder of countless children. At first, he denied everything, but after days of questioning, threats of torture, and the weight of the evidence, Gilles broke down. In tears, he confessed to crimes that froze the hearts of all who listened. Some said he confessed to seek forgiveness before death. Others claimed he was forced, his words twisted by fear. The judges sentenced him to death by hanging and his body to be burned. On October 26, 1440, in front of thousands, Gilles de Rais, once Marshal of France, met his end. Before the rope tightened around his neck, he asked forgiveness from God and from the families of his victims. The crowd wept, not just for the dead, but for the man he had once been. After his death, his castles were abandoned, his lands sold, his memory cursed. But centuries later, historians began to question the tale. Was Gilles truly guilty of all he was accused of? Or had he been destroyed by enemies who desired his wealth and power? Some argued the trial was politically motivated. Others that superstition exaggerated the crimes. Whatever the truth, his story became legend, inspiring the old French folktale of Bluebeard, the nobleman who murdered his wives and hid their bodies behind locked doors. The story of Gilles de Rais is not just about one man's fall. It is about the fragile line between greatness and madness. He fought beside saints and stood before kings. He held honor, glory, and faith in his hands and let them slip away. From hero to monster, from marshal to murderer, his life reminds us that even the brightest star can burn itself to ashes. That power without purpose leads only to ruin. So remember, every empire built on pride will one day crumble, and every man who forgets his soul in search of power will one day face the silence of his own darkness. Today, 6 centuries later, his castles still stand, old stones whispering with the echoes of the past. The wind that moves through their empty halls carries both prayer and curse. And somewhere, between legend and truth, the spirit of Gilles de Rais remains, a warning carved into history, the marshal who rose with the saints and fell with the demons. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves dark history. See you in the next story, where another secret from the past awaits.